one advantage or disadvantage, you can determine which it is, of living a long time is everything reminds you of something else. It doesn't take much to get you off track, at least. So I sat here thinking about various things when Martin talked about one of the phrases that we hate to hear is I'm not good enough. There's another phrase that reminds me of somebody else will do it. Now someone has left some shoes up here, and that makes me think of something. I'll be talking a little bit about doing things. So when you see empty shoes, the message may be someone needs to fill those shoes. Could it be me? And of course, just to poke a little bit at Daphne, I sat in here watching her, a grandmother, thinking many years ago, she may not even remember this, but I certainly do, because my oldest daughter was going out to her Graceland visit, and we took Daphne with us. Daphne was nervous. Now, when Daphne gets nervous, at least in those days, she needs a bathroom stop. And I believe in 600 miles, we must have stopped 27 times for her to go to the bathroom. I'm not sure of that. But golly, that was a long trip. Made longer by the fact it rained the whole weekend. And for those of you who may have been to Graceland, when it rains, the worms come out and they're huge. So the first thing they learned was do not wear gym shoes. They have these cleats on the bottom of them on worm days because they'll get in there and you'll smell up things later on. When Sandy called me a few weeks ago to go over the order of service with me, she then wanted to offer prayer on my behalf. And part of the prayer was a preliminary part that said, was just giving me instructions, close my eyes, close off the rest of the world, and listen to the Spirit as it unfolds, if you will. Make room for the Spirit. Now, unbeknownst to her, I was in the midst of preparing 3 different sermons because I was preaching every other week there for a while. This being the last one. And I told her that it's kind of interesting because she said to breathe in the Spirit, and the scripture that I'm going to be reading in a minute talks about Jesus breathing out the Spirit for the people who are following him to breathe it in, if you will. So I'm going to read an excerpt from the 20th chapter of John, and it goes like this. This is a post-resurrection appearance of Jesus, the first time in this particular area. And it goes like this. Jesus said to them again, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I send you." When he had said this, he breathed on them and said, "Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven. If you retain the sins of any, they are retained." I have been reading a little bit recently about the expansion of Christianity between the time of the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, which has been referred to already in the Sunday school class, I guess, and which was in 70 AD, and the time when Christianity became an okay religion, which is around 312. So in a period of roughly 250 years or so, from the temple destruction until the time that the Christians kind of quit being persecuted, even though it was not an ongoing thing all the time. John was written about but about the time, and probably partly in response to the time when, after the destruction of the temple, the churches moved into the synagogues, and the Christians were starting to be squeezed out of the synagogues, those who acknowledged Jesus as the Messiah, because the people in the synagogues believed that the Messiah was still to come, had not yet come at least. So it's that particular period of time. Yet Christianity was growing, and one of the questions is why? Why is it growing? We don't know for sure. We do know that it was unwelcome in some areas. In fact, in about 170, one of the emperors said something like this: the Christians are the people who welcome slaves, pickpockets, gullible women. Now, I don't know what a gullible woman is, although some of the husbands here may say, yeah, I married one. But gullible women, thieves and prostitutes, the marginal people of society, despised by the government. It's kind of interesting to realize that the very people that Jesus came to bring ministry to, not that it wasn't to all, but were the people that were despised by the government. Rodney Stark, in his book called The Rise of Christianity, said, at least in part, the growth of Christianity can be related to the services that the Christians provided during the time of the plagues, which was somewhere in that general time at least. You know, you can always tell the first responder by they're the ones running into the fire while everybody's running out. At the time of the plagues, the same thing was happening. Those who were able-bodied left town, left their families behind, fend for themselves, no way to feed them, no way to care for them, so forth. And the Christians were coming in. A lot of the people survived the plague, probably because they were being fed and they didn't starve to death while they were overcoming the disease. So there were people who probably became followers of Jesus because of the example that they had seen when they were going through this themselves. There's a miracle that is the only miracle that occurs in all four Gospels. That's the feeding of the 5,000. Now, there's a little bit of variation between the Gospels. Was it 5,000 men only, or 5,000 plus women and children? What was it? Details are not that important here. What is important is, in John at least, there was a gathering of the disciples after this had taken place, when Jesus was talking about what are the requirements of discipleship. And he described them in such a way that a lot of people said, I don't think I want to do that. One of them said, these are hard sayings. Who can hear them? And it said from that time forward, many of them walked no longer with Jesus. And Jesus turned to some of the disciples there. And when I say disciples, I want to distinguish these are disciples, not the apostles necessarily, because in John, the apostles don't get much publicity. In the other Gospels they do. In John, the disciples are the ones who get the publicity, which I'll refer to again in a minute. He said, will the rest of you leave me too? And one of them said, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. And they stayed with him. The ones who left because the free fish burgers were no longer being passed out. And they realized that they might be called to do something else, at least. See, there are some times that we need to be fed. There are some times we need to be the ones who are providing the food. And that's a little bit more difficult. That's a different pair of shoes, maybe, than what we would like to admit. In the Gospel of John, and by the way, think of this. How many metaphors to food do we have in the church? all over the place. You know. See, there are double meanings. Throughout the Gospel of John, he uses words that mean this and also mean this. Bread or bread, water, living water, light, enlightenment, you know, all those kind of things, you know, they can be used two different ways, and both of them are important. But sometimes we want to use only the earthly meaning, if you will. Sight, shepherd. Now, here's one I'm going to throw in here that's not necessarily there, but homeless. There's homeless and there's homeless. There are homeless people who have no roof over their heads. There are people who have a roof over their head, but they're still homeless. We'll talk about that more. The text that I read, here's the deal. You, who he's talking to, will have the power to forgive or retain sin. Now that's a God thing, right? What does it mean? Well, the way he's writing at least, it means that you, whoever he's talking to, will have the ability to free people from sin or leave them in sin. That's a heavy thing. That may require a different kind of shoes than what we're used to. See, as long as we believe that Jesus was talking to the apostles, that's their job. But if we believe that Jesus was talking to the disciples, now that's getting up close and personal. Jesus was concerned that when he left, the people would not have the courage to carry on the work that Jesus had started. And so he said, receive the Spirit. And the Spirit's a big deal in the Gospel of John. But how can we retain the sins of others? It's very simple. It may be an action we take or an action we don't take. In the Congregation of Independence, on Communion Sunday, this is back in the days when we checked to make sure people were members of the church before we served them communion. But in those days, a woman came in just on Communion Sunday, just before the prayer on the bread and wine was going to be offered. She did not look like she fit in church, according to some people around her at least. She came in and sat down in the back row. The friend of mine who was serving that row leaned over and people were kind of, I say, no, not her. He leaned over and said, "Are you a member of the church?" Thank God, that's all I have left. So she took communion, she took the bread, she took the wine, and she left. She was there for 10 minutes or less. Never to be heard from again, so far as we know. There were people there who wanted to deny her the blessing that could have come into her life from taking communion for what could have been the first time in years. What harm would it have done if she'd been denied after maybe coming back into the fold for the first time in a long time? She could have come in feeling sinful and left feeling even more sinful, if you will, just by the actions or lack of action that could have taken place there. Now, when I talk about sin here, I'm not talking about these old ways of sinning, like sitting with a pack of cigarettes. And I can relate to that. Connie talked about one time about, I don't know what I was doing, but more than likely I was sitting there with a cigarette in one hand and a beer in the other hand. At some time in her life, there were times that she would not have been allowed into the church because she might have smoked a cigarette or something like that. I would go to church on Sundays as a non-member with a pack of cigarettes in my pocket, listen to the people talking about the sin of smoking. Well, that was not what I was concerned about at the time. I had more concerned about other things in my life, at least. So, we're talking about the sins of omission, the sins of oppression, the sins of things that are beyond what you do or don't do, and in the moment at least. We're talking about people who are in situations or conditions where they cannot be free, where they cannot be accepted, where they're spiritually homeless. Here's something to keep you awake at night. Imagine if you're going to bed at night and you suddenly can hear the cries of all of the children crying themselves to sleep because they have no food. Or you come to an understanding about all of the kids who go to school who have to sit alone in the cafeteria because they have no friends, and how they feel. None of us could bear that. I mean, that would be unbearable. That's not just a hard sin. We couldn't put up with that. It's too much to consider. See, these people are captives to a degree of the sins of others. So the gift of the Spirit is to help us carry on the work of Jesus, but not to take on the entire work of Jesus, but to take upon to fill the shoes that we have been. I'm glad somebody left those up there, because I've referred to it 15 times now. To fill the shoes that need to be filled when somebody's not there. And I'm suggesting that when we get this gift of the Spirit, and in order to do something, that we take one more step. Here's what I mean by that. Nobody that I'm aware of wants to see people go hungry. And so the easiest way that we have of providing ministry is to support food pantries or food banks or something like that. And it's a great service. But feeding people is more than one step, if you will. I have been on the board of a food pantry now for almost all the time I've lived in Ohio, different ones. But anyhow, I'm not saying that just going to something I'm not great. I'm not. I've been on the board. Doesn't mean you do any work there. But here's the thing we discovered. In Loveland, there was no food pantry. They kind of gone out of business. In fact, we had a very small one that actually put out of business because we were doing some things that were not probably legal. But we got a group of people together and formed this food pantry. And people donated food, donated money, and you could have a can of corn, a can of beans, all that kind of stuff, everything. And somebody said, and I'm going to say somebody said 3 or 4 times during this, because it wasn't me that said it. Somebody said, the people we're serving probably would benefit from a more nutritious selection than what we have now. Could we add fruit? Could we add fresh vegetables wherever we can do, Yeah, we could do that. So we did that. And somebody said, some of these people, have enough food, but every now and then they can't pay their utility bills and they're going to get kicked out if they do that. Could we do some kind of assistance, financial assistance? Yeah, we do that. We probably spend $50,000 a year now on people's utilities and things like that just to help them out. We serve like 500-600 people a month. So it's a pretty fair sized operation there. And somebody said, the kids, they go to school, get free lunches at school, but they go 3 months of the year without any food. Can we do something about that? So now we have a summer lunch program. I'm looking at some of your announcements here, and you got something kind of similar to that going on with some of the things that you do. And then somebody said, because the majority of the people that we provide food for are working. They're not making enough to support themselves. So, sometimes our car breaks down and we can't get it fixed. Could we do something about that? Could we add that to our list of things? And we did that, and I look at what Grove City folks are doing now to help people with their same situation. Yes, we can do that. We have a couple of people who know how to fix them, but we also have found a fairly friendly mechanic who will do it a lot cheaper, and so we can help them do that. And then we said, somebody needs about child care, and we haven't been able to do that one yet. That's a tough one to do. Can we help people improve their situations through their jobs? Can we provide scholarships to help people go to a trade school or something like that so they can maybe support themselves better? And so we're doing that. Everyone is a step away from what we originally set out to do, but everyone is kind of drilling down that every step you take is something that needs to be done. Now, what I've been talking about here are mostly physical needs. But we know that there are people who hunger for more than food. We know that you guys are involved in Meals on Wheels. A friend of mine was on that, and he said, they allow me a certain amount of time to deliver the meals. I take twice that much time because what I've realized is they need food, but they need companionship. So when I go in there, here's the food. Then I sat down and visit with them for a half hour or so. Maybe that's the only people they see. He said, I quit going to church before I quit doing that because the need is so much there. And I don't know about you guys, when you provide Meals on Wheels, if you do the same thing or not. Maybe you're on a different kind of schedule. But that's what he would do at least. Now, this next story, and as you'll know by now, I usually tell more stories than I do preaching. This next story has to do with my youngest grandson, and he's given me permission to share this because it could be embarrassing to him, I suppose. But he said, yes, you can do it. When he was a freshman, he was selected to be part of the like honors choir. It had a different name than that in high school. It was only open to sophomores, juniors, and seniors, and he tried out and was selected, and got a lot of publicity as he was going around and said, "Oh, we're going to have a freshman in the choir now," and so forth. So it was interesting to listen to read some of these emails that were going around, and not only that, for the first concert that they did, performance, he was given a short solo. Well, we were just proud as we could be. And he muffed it. He got off he forgot some of the words, got off in the wrong tune, things like that, and he struggled and struggled. He got through it and got through the rest of the time, but you could tell by looking at him how heartbroken he was. And he went back to the rehearsal room and was back there for a long time, then came out to where all the people were waiting, and just heartbroken. And there was a senior in that choir, 6'6", so he taller than anybody there. And he came up to him, and I could hear what he was saying, and he was just talking to him and reassuring him and everything. We've all been through things like this, and he overcame it. But the rest of the story is this. The choir director for the last performance of the year would honor all of the graduating seniors. And usually she'd ask them to sing a small solo or something like that. So this 6'6" guy who'd been reassuring my grandson was going to do a solo. Turns out he'd never done one in his life. He was scared to death. He looked like he'd go bear hunting with a switch, but he's scared to death. My grandson goes over to him, and this is not his personality to seek people out to talk to. He had to overcome his own shyness. Went over to him and sat and talked to him for a couple of minutes, and we were not there. But the guy came up to us later and said, "He was the one who got me through this. He thought I didn't pass out when I was singing. Maybe I'd done a great job. I didn't pass out at least. Two, 3, 4, 5 minutes is all the time it took for the big guy to talk to my grandson, or my grandson to talk to him. Not a huge investment in time, but a huge investment in nerve, in moving out of a comfort zone to do that. Jesus is sending people to get outside of their comfort zones by doing things that they're not really wanting to do. When we start thinking about this, if we think about all the hungry kids in the world cry at the same time, if we think about these other things going on, we can say, holy cow, this is more. This is more than I can do. And it is. But that's not an excuse to do nothing. My neighbor, a couple, 3 doors down, was an engineer. He still is an engineer, just doesn't live on my street anymore. And he traveled for his company. And he'd wind up in places, and I'm going to say Honduras, but I could be wrong by half a continent for all I know. But in places where there were these villages, they had water, but the water was so far down that it took forever to get it pumped up. But they had no electricity. So he designed in his garage solar-powered pumps. And he would make as many as he could, and then at his own expense make them, and then at his own expense travel down there to install them. I'm guessing that he might have installed 12 or 15 over the course of the years that he lived on our street. He lives in Salt Lake City now, and he still does that from time to time, but we only communicate about once or twice a year now. The majority of the people down there still have the issue, but a dozen of them don't. Everybody can do at least something, if you will. I suspect that some of you here know Randy Marsh. She's a member of the Loveland, yes, she was Loveland, the Cincinnati congregation. She is now in Kenya. She's on her 30th trip to Kenya in the last 19 years. The first few trips were on behalf of another organization, and she saw things in Kenya that kind of stirred her heart to action. Now, a lot of you who do know her realize that she's stirred to action a lot. She's joins protests and things like that. But anyhow, they have an issue over there in Nairobi and probably other places as well, where a lot of young girls become pregnant at the hands of their father or their pastor. And then they get kicked out of the house, and they're homeless. And so Randy started her own 501c3 called Hand in Hand, and tried to establish a safe house, and is still working on getting a building, but she does a safe house, and if you look at it on Facebook, you will see that any of the pictures of the girls, they're not recognizable because they're safe only as long as people don't know where to find them, because their parents or their fathers are still wanting to punish them somehow. Now, there are many, many people there, maybe we'll say thousands, at least 1,000. But there are 90 or 100 less than there were because of what Randy's doing. So she's doing what she can. She's doing more than most of us can do. Some of us, like I can provide a little bit of money, like for Christmas time. They decided they're going to give Christmas gifts to all the girls there. No one there had ever had a Christmas gift before. It's interesting. Can you imagine children, 12, 14 years old, who've never had a Christmas gift? We all need a safe house or a safe place. The choir became a safe place for some people because of the love that people had for one another in that group. Let me suggest us this. Do what you're led to do. Fill the shoes that you find needing filled. Then consider, once you do that, taking one more step. One step deeper into the ministry to which you're called. You can't do it all. That's okay. There's others doing the same things you may never meet. But together, more things can happen. Now, if I were to ask you to mention somebody, talk about somebody who stepped up and helped you in bad times, we'd be here till sometime this afternoon. If I ask you to share times that the Spirit has nudged you, we'd be here longer too. But there'd be times also you'd be saying, I feel so bad because the Spirit kind of nudged me and I didn't do anything about it. That's okay. You don't have to repeat that again. But doesn't mean that you can't step up somewhere. I was in a rehearsal room at the University of Cincinnati Choral Arts building a few weeks ago. I was in there doing some work on Camp Bountiful stuff because the room was empty, and all at once here comes it's filled up with adults, all women except for one. They're the alumni choir who are graduates of the youth choir from years gone by. And so I'm in there listening to them go through their rehearsal for their 2 songs they're going to sing at the program a couple of weeks later. And one of the songs was entitled "She Don't Stop," and I couldn't understand all of the words to it. My hearing's not the greatest, but it sounded like this. And it's kind of sung in almost a monotone. She's going to go home with some guy tonight. She didn't know which one, something like that at least. And there was a woman about 4 feet from me standing singing. I looked over there. The tears were just running down her face, her cheeks. And then I noticed that someone standing further away turned around and saw her, and she came back. And so they're, was closer than from here to the shoes. They're just hugging each other and crying like crazy. And then when the song ended, the choir director called her by name and said, "I know this is sorry for you. I know it's touching a nerve." And that's all I know. I don't know what the situation. It's not my business to know what the situation was. All I know is that she was reliving something in her life, unpleasant, and there were people stepping up and being Jesus for her during this time of pain for her. Thanks be to God. Thanks be to God that there are people willing to move out of their own comfort zone to help bless someone who's hungry or homeless or hopeless.